Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to talk about how I went about fixing this. This is the first draft of a very challenging commission that I recently did of an Egyptian Arabian horse. And I was not happy with the outcome, and so I did a little bit of research, learned how to mix my own browns, and I repainted it. And I want to show you how it went. So if you're interested, stick around and you will get to see me repaint this commission. Now, I want to talk about this for just a minute before I get into the new one. So this one is the one that I kept. I actually don't have the new one because it was shipped off to the customer. But I'm really happy with how the new one turned out. I want to talk about this one and why it's not acceptable to me. A lot of people might look at this and think it's good, and it's decent, it's okay, but I'm just not satisfied with it. So first I'm going to start off by showing you the reference photo that I was working from. So this is kind of tricky because this horse had a person standing right here. So the horse's neck was kind of craning around its owner, and I had to remove the person and then try to recreate some of the neck. I know it's not perfect, but it is what it is. Now, an Egyptian Arabian horse, they have kind of this swoop neck. They have a very thin nose area, and so it might look a little bit different than like what you think of when you think of just a regular like quarter horse. So this beautiful Egyptian Arabian was kind of a challenge in a way because I had to do a lot of editing. I'm not going to show you the original because I don't want to show you the person just for privacy. And then I also had to paint it without this beautiful bridle on. So it was quite a challenge, and I ended up trying to use AI to put the neck in, and I want to show you the result just for fun. So Canva has an AI option. And I typed in add the horse's neck and chest. So I just wanted it to fill in the horse's neck and chest, and this is what Canva's AI gave me. I thought that was pretty funny. I had a good laugh, and hopefully you do too. So my AI skills are not there yet. So back to the horse. I ended up choosing just some colors off my palette: burnt umber, transparent brown oxide, Dyke Brown, neutral tint, just the standard colors that I usually would use. And this is kind of what I came up with. So the background was an afterthought. I had painted the horse and thought, I don't know, it just needs a little something. And so I went ahead and painted a background. Now the problem is when you're doing a background after the fact, you either end up going over the actual face or you end up with white lines, and it's very, very tricky to do a background and have it look good after the fact. Some other things about it is it's definitely overworked. Definitely overworked, especially here. The hair I wasn't happy with. I do like these wispy hairs I was able to achieve there. The eye is okay, and then I'm happy with those, but the rest of it, it's just yucky. It's overworked, it's flat, it's dull, it is not luminous. And so I went on a mission to figure out how I can paint a horse that's more luminous, that's not overworked, and also how to do the hair. And so in my research, I found out that you can very easily mix your own browns, and they are just so lovely and luminous and bright and colorful. So come along with me and I will talk you through this process of how I mixed my own browns to repaint this horse, and I'm really pleased with the outcome. So the first change that I made was before I was using an 11 by 15 quarter sheet of 300-pound Fabriano Artistico soft press paper. And the horse's head just felt kind of small. I felt limited. And so what I did here was I actually cut a piece of 16 by 20, and then I pre-purchased my mats. I always mat the commissions that I do. So I wanted the full sheet of paper to be the exact same size as the mat. And then I just drew the horse's head within the opening of the mat, which is 11 by 14. That made a huge difference for me. And what I'm doing here is I'm doing the background first this time. So using a wide flat brush, I put water down. I did let it overlap a little bit on the horse, and that is okay as long as I avoid the highlight areas. So here what I'm doing is I have a mix of burnt umber and ultramarine blue, and I've mixed various mixes. So if you have more blue, it's going to be more gray. If you have more brown, it's going to lean more brown. So you get kind of warm and cool grays out of this mixture. Some people like to use burnt sienna instead. I have been using burnt umber. I like transparent red oxide as an alternative to burnt sienna. But anyway, here I am using burnt umber and ultramarine blue in various mixtures to do this background. I want this to be light and flowy and just kind of subtle. I don't want it to stand out. We obviously want the horse to stand out. But you definitely, I think that when you do the background first, it just looks so much better. And here I'm doing some splatter. I really enjoy a little bit of subtle splatter. I like a soft splatter versus like hard. So sometimes if, as you can see here, if I do a little splatter, I'll do it wet and wet, or I'll use a spray bottle to wet the splatter afterwards. So here I'm using my brush just to kind of manipulate the background a little bit, being very thoughtful about the balance. There's definitely a balance in a piece of art, especially with a commission, where like you wouldn't want the background to overwhelm the subject, but you also don't want like a ton of white space, if that makes sense. So that's kind of what I was going for here. It's okay to paint the background over the subject as long as you know that where you'll be painting on the subject that you will be using a darker value color, because that will go ahead and just cover up the background. And there's about a 3-inch area on each side that's going to be overlapped by the matte, so some of this doesn't matter as much. So I continued to play with it, and anywhere that it was on the face of the horse, I needed to lift it back off because there's some highlights there. So I just used a brush and paper towel alternatively to go ahead and lift that off. But as far as the neck and the mane, that is going to be okay because it's going to be covered up. Okay, so now the background's dry. I did add a little bit of salt. We'll talk about that in another video, but I wanted a little more texture. So here's the 3 colors that I chose for mixing my browns. I've got Phthalo Green Blue shade, Aureolin Cobalt Yellow, and Permanent Alizarin Crimson. And with those 3 colors, you can make all shades of brown, ochre, sienna. It's very versatile. Aureolin is not my favorite. As you can see, it's kind of gummy. It has a funky texture. Some people love it. It's beautiful. But I prefer using something like Nickel Azo Yellow, or even maybe Hansa Yellow Light. But it doesn't matter. You just need a yellow, something preferably leaning a little cooler. And here I've got my Permanent Alizarin Crimson. And this was my very first time ever mixing my own browns for a pet portrait. So this was really fun. So the first thing you do is you create an orange color. So you start by mixing the red and the yellow, and then you slowly add in a little bit of green. Now, if you don't have green and you're using primary colors, you can make green first. However you want to do it, you're going to use blue instead of green, but you'll have to add a little more yellow to compensate. So as you slowly add the green to the orange that you created, you start to get brown. And then you just keep adjusting as you go. So here I've got a little piece of Arches rough paper, and I'm just testing out my mixture first. It's really important to test your mixtures before putting it on the actual painting. And here you can see me adjusting, adding a little more of this, a little more of that, and you'll get it as you go. It just takes a little bit of playing around with it. Maybe grab a sketchbook and see all the different ranges you can get. I mean, you can even get like a yellow ochre with these 3 colors. I was trying to mix a brown that kind of matched my reference photo, but I wanted something a little bit more glowy. And when I say glowy, I kind of mean like luminescent, warm, and basically everything opposite of what my first painting was. It fell kind of flat, if you know what I mean. And I normally don't use reds in my work. I have Quinacridone Red on my dot card, but it's more of a magenta. So this was really new for me to use the Permanent Alizarin Crimson. And phthalo as well. If you know me, if you're my student, you know how I feel about phthalos. I'm a little bit hesitant I usually end up getting too much phthalo and they overpower your mixture, as you can see here. I've basically made a purple. But a little bit goes a long way with the phthalo colors, and they're very staining as well, so that's something to take into consideration. So this experiment was so completely outside of the norm for me, and I learned so much doing this. Like I always say, I learn more from my failures than I do my successes, and it wasn't this painting that taught me, it was actually the first one, because I painted it and I had so many frustrations. Sometimes you get to the point where you're like, am I even an artist? Should I even be teaching other people if I don't know what I'm doing? But it was so valuable. And if you can stick it out and not give up, you will learn so much. I had to cut out so much mixing footage there, but I finally achieved a dark brown that was equivalent to like a Van Dyke brown, like I said before. So I wanted a burnt umber, I wanted a Van Dyke brown, and I was able to achieve those different ranges with these three colors. Once I mixed up enough paint, I was able to start painting. So I started with the ears. This was really weird for me because, you guys, I usually start with the eyes. It's okay to go outside of the box sometimes. So I've created my 5-step pet portrait system, right? I created it for me. I created it to give myself a way and a system, because I'm very system oriented. I'm very creative in that way that if I have a problem, I will solve it by creating a system that's more efficient and that just works for me. So I created this 5-step pet portrait system where I start with the eyes, then I do with the nose. I basically work in sections. So I'm sectioning off my painting and I follow that system because it really helps me avoid frustration. It helps me avoid the ugly phase. But I want to say this is a big but. We can create systems for ourselves and follow them, but they should never become a box that we're putting ourselves in. And I actually feel like in a lot of ways I have put myself in a box because I've become so dependent on my system that I'm not being as creative as I could be. So with this one, I decided I will still work in sections. I will still plan it out, but it's okay for me to try something new. So I started with the ears and I'm working on dry paper, as you can see. A lot of people like to do wet and wet for their first layer. I'm not one of them. I enjoy painting on dry paper. I have more control and I definitely get a heavier pigment load in the first layer. But I'm also not usually this even. I just wanted to try something new with this entire painting. So the first one I did use my 5-step system and I did follow my usual approach and it didn't turn out. So I decided to change tactics a little bit and reevaluate, and honestly so flipping thrilled with how this one turned out. So the first thing I'm really noticing as I'm doing this is, first off, the background is so lovely. I'm so thrilled with how that turned out because, as you know, I'm not a huge background person. Most of my pet portraits, dogs and cats especially, don't have a background at all. They're just a floating head and chest on white paper. I think I'm kind of loving backgrounds now. The second thing I'm noticing is how gorgeous this brown is. I mean, compared to just regular burnt umber, this brown is glowing. It's absolutely glowing. I don't know if I'm going to ever be able to go back to burnt umber again, to be honest. I'm also allowing, as you can see there on the neck, I am allowing blooms and blossoms or cauliflowers, whatever you want to call it. Everybody has a different way of calling it, but I'm allowing them, especially on my first layer. That first layer is kind of a little bit more forgiving in the sense that I can allow things to settle on the paper as they like to settle. If you've seen me swatch, you know that I like to drop in a little bit of water at the end and kind of disperse the pigments so that we get extra granulation, we get extra blooms and blossoms. It's so pretty. It's so delicious. I can't even get over it. So that's something that I try to achieve now in my actual pet portraits. So I'm taking it from just swatching and I'm translating it into my pet portraits. Okay, so I've done a lot of talking. I am going to allow you to sit back and enjoy the next little bit, set to some music, and just watch this process unfold. So as you can see, this just takes a lot of layering. I really think that that is the key. It's layering, but it's gentle layering. You can see that I'm always using a really light, gentle hand. I'm not being aggressive or heavy-handed as I'm putting the paint on the paper. The only time I even go back over paint that I've put down is if I need to soften an edge or lift. And that is one of the biggest things that I teach my students is how to use a gentle hand and how to put paint down and leave it alone. Which is kind of a funny thing to say, since one of my most known sayings is put paint down and then mess it up. So there's two kind of principles going on here. One is that if I'm making like a hair or I'm adding a detail or some kind of a texture, I very rarely will just put the paint down and let it be. I will put the paint down and then I'll kind of mess it up a little bit. I'll soften the edge if necessary. If it's a hair, I will kind of use my finger to dab it around. I always want to make sure that the paint that I'm putting down looks almost like it painted itself. That's my goal. It's freshness. This I painted myself kind of look, like the painting just kind of appeared. Wouldn't it be amazing if you could just spill paint on your paper and it would paint itself? That's kind of what I'm going for. So as you can see here, I'm putting paint down. I'm being very gentle and delicate and thoughtful about it. And then I'm going to go back in, I'm going to mess it up, and I may even add water droplets. So here you can see that I'm adding a little bit of water. I want that texture, especially on the neck. Now when I'm painting eye details, noses, that kind of thing, I'm a little more realistic with those. I'm going for that realism. And so I don't allow cauliflowers and stuff like that. I want to be tight, I want to be detailed. But as the painting progresses and I head into fur or hair or feathers, I want it to be a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? Gestural. Like I'm painting a hair, but it's not a hair. It's the texture. It's the idea of fur or hair or feathers. So even here where I'm kind of putting in the mane, I'm going to put hairs down, but then I'm going to go in and mess it up. I don't leave a lot of hard edges. But the important thing is to know when to leave a hard edge and when to soften it. And that just comes with time and experience and practice. That's one of the things that my students benefit from working with me the most is kind of having that guidance and that hand holding in the beginning. And then over time, we slowly take the training wheels off as they learn and as they begin to understand, oh, that needs to be a hard edge, or oh, this needs to be a soft, or hey, maybe this edge could be a lost and found edge. We love those lost and found edges, don't we? So if you'll remember, the mane on my first version of this was really tight and really overworked. So I was being really careful that any paint I put down, I wanted to mess it up, add blooms and blossoms, and give it that look that we just can't put into words. So that was my biggest goal here. Now to achieve this deep, dark, almost Van Dyke brown, I just added a little more of the green to the mixture. So if you've got like a nice light golden brown and you want it to be darker or more grayed down, you're going to add more green. If you want it more, let's say yellow ochre, for example, you're going to add more yellow. And so mixing these three colors together to get different shades of brown, it's going to come with just playing with it and doing a lot of practice. Grab a sketchbook, play around, see what colors you can come up with. It's amazing that we can create a whole range of earth tones with just 3 colors. You may notice I don't actually do a whole lot of wet and wet, and I'd like to explain that just a little bit. So I've talked about it before. I love the Fabriano Artistico soft press paper. It's got a certain texture that no other paper has. I have never experienced another texture like it, and I am so here for it. The way that these silver black velvet brushes feel on this soft press paper is it's an experience. I can't describe it to you. You just have to feel it for yourself. And by the way, I do have samples of this paper on my website for purchase, so go check that out. But there is something about putting this paint down on this paper with this brush that I love. You may try it and you may not get it. The thing is, as artists, we get to experiment and try out different things and see what works for us. Because for me, the experience of painting is more important to me than the outcome. Yes, the outcome's important to me. Yes, I'm going to put a lot into that. But if I'm not enjoying the experience of it, there is 0 point for me. So, that's just so what I just did right there. Watching that paint go down on that dry paper is just my absolute favorite. When I do wet and wet, and I do wet and wet. I almost said I do, and I changed it. And then I had to go ahead and say it anyway. So there you go. I do wet and wet all the time, but I'm very selective about it. If I really, really feel that it's needed, I will do it. But for the most part, I would much rather put paint down on dry paper and then just soften the edges to get the effect I'm looking for. I feel like I have way more control, but I also think I get a better pigment load, because when you're putting wet paint on wet paper, it's going to dry a lot lighter. I know you've experienced this before. It is going to dry a lot lighter. So by doing the paint on dry paper, I'm actually able to control how much pigment, I'm able to control how far it spreads. And so for me, it's just a matter of water control and the way that it makes me feel. I actually have found that a lot of my students try both ways. Some of them like wet and wet better, and others like my method better. And that's the fun of it, is we get to try all these different artists' methods and see what works for us. So the way that I paint is just a conglomerate of all the different tutorials and workshops I have taken over the years, and kind of picking and choosing what I like out of each and then putting that together into my own style. Finding your own style isn't about copying others or getting it perfect every time. It's about showing up, experimenting, and letting your unique voice emerge through the paint. Every brushstroke, every mistake, every failed painting, and I say fail here with quotation marks because failure is subjective, and failure, as we know, means you just gave up. So, I think redefining what it means to fail. What does that mean for you? Does it mean that you gave it everything you had and you just hate the way it looks? Does it mean you entered it in a contest and you didn't make it? Or does it mean you gave up? Because for me, it means I gave up. I have so many failed paintings sitting in my drawer because I just simply didn't finish them. Every one of those paintings is part of the journey. Every moment of frustration is part of the journey. So embrace the process, enjoy the unpredictability of watercolor, and most importantly, keep painting, because the world needs your art, not a copy of something else, your art. I hope you enjoyed this. I'm so happy with how this turned out. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you had any takeaways, I'd love to hear them. I just freaking love you guys, and I hope you have an amazing week.